Face on Channel 31. You're watching Bent TV. We're with Michael Kelly from Rainbow Sash. Now, just before the break, Michael, we were talking about sexual ethics. I think something I'd be particularly interested in is what's the theological basis for the Church's opposition to homosexuality? Is there any real theological basis for it?
It would be, they would say two things. One, that more or less what I was saying before the break, that any form of sexual pleasure or enjoyment that's not within a heterosexual context in marriage oriented towards procreation is evil.
Yep.
Now they'd say that for heterosexuals. They'd also say it for homosexuals. Now this is why people like George Pell will sometimes say the rule's the same for everybody. In one sense it kind of is, but the fact is that gay people aren't oriented towards having sex with the opposite sex within marriage, going towards procreation. So it's just like too bad for us. That's the first thing they'd say. It's just like that's what sex is for. Now, as I say, this century they've begun to say it's also for pleasure. We're now pointing out to them that, so a lot of theologians, that infertile heterosexual couples are allowed to have sex, even though they're not going to have babies. Couples where the woman is postmenopausal are allowed to have sex, even though there aren't going to be babies. So why can't the same communion of love and intimacy justify sex for gay couples? Well, then they'll come back and say, oh yes, but you've got to have a man and a woman because they've got to be complementary, because fundamentally everybody's heterosexual. It's just some people have a homosexual problem. Well, this is really nonsense. It's only in the 1970s, the Church finally got around to talking about the homosexual condition.
Yep.
Until then, it was very much the attitude that they're heterosexual people doing naughty things that weren't within their nature. Since the 70s, the Church has finally caught up with psychology and psychiatry, started to talk about homosexual people or people with a homosexual orientation, which is very deep-seated and is not a choice and may even be innate, like inborn. Now, the philosophers and the theologians are now saying, well, if that's the case, then why and infertile couples can have sex, why can't these people live out their orientation in loving and creative ways? Why do we have to be so focused on where this bit of seed goes?
Yep.
And it's getting increasingly hard for the people at the top to find coherent arguments against that. Really, this would be the mainstream moral theological viewpoint now, that gay people ought at least be encouraged to form loving, responsible relationships in which they can be sexually expressive. Then you've got this hard line from people like George Pell, people like these guys who've just been here from America, Harvey and Rudy Gere, saying, no, we can't change this. Ironically called courage. Showing none when they're called to debate this in the public arena, I might add, running away from radio shows and any debate about it. Saying, in effect, nothing can change. This hard line, which down the centuries has condemned homosexual acts, can never change. And a lot of that is based in fear, a fear that if the churches seem to be open, and open to dialogue and open to change, the authority structure will be undermined. It's as if they're terrified that if people see that the emperor doesn't have too many clothes on behind the curtain, I'm mixing my metaphors.
It's an interesting vision.
Yeah, very interesting vision. In the sacristy, whatever. The whole thing will collapse. Of course, a lot of people would say it should collapse. That the hierarchical structure that is so dictatorial, that refuses to listen, that refuses to dialogue, that refuses to make space for ordinary human nature and all its diversity, that has to collapse. And I think I'd agree with that. I don't want to see the Catholic tradition and the whole spiritual heritage die, but I think in a sense it's in danger of being cut off at the root by this totalitarian regime that's running the show at the moment and is neutering whatever wisdom and richness the Church has to offer in the name of this really tight-assed orthodoxy that's doing nobody any good.
It's actually really at odds with you see in so many parts of the world the church has been at the forefront of giving people a voice, particularly in countries of dictatorship.
Yeah.
So I often wonder how it, that allowing people that freedom, yet restricting their sexual freedom, and having taken thousands of years to get to this point that we've spoken of, that, I mean, to me it's not logical. It's like, the people, the courage that basically that they have the cure. That we've made a choice to be homosexual. I mean, the logical arguments against it, I mean, do you think they actually hear them?
I think some do and some don't want to. I think there are some people who are frankly concerned with their career in the church, and the current regime under John Paul II is paradoxically extremely open and radical in terms of human rights and social justice outside the church. When it comes to dealing with issues of power control inside the church, it's extremely tight, extremely rigid and extremely oppressive. And there are some people who are trying to further their career in that structure.
Right.
So they don't want to hear the arguments, they don't want to be open. And promoting people like Father Harvey, who's just been out here from America, is part of getting brownie points in Rome to further their career. I think one of the great tragedies of the current situation in the church is that you've got wonderful people all around the world doing extraordinary work. I think I was saying to you earlier that the largest provider of AIDS and HIV services in the world is the Catholic Church, and certainly within Africa it's the Catholic Church overwhelmingly. I know some of these people personally, and they do amazing work, and a lot of them are either priests or nuns, or they're supported and funded by religious orders. And yet officially, they're not allowed to promote condoms. So there's a good example of this really bizarre, mix in the church. Now, at the same time, there's people all around the world, theologians, bishops, doctors, and certainly people in Africa, radically challenging that attitude towards condoms. But these very powerful people in Rome are keeping the lid on. Not because it's good for people with AIDS, but because it goes back to what we were saying before about the sexual ethic and the fear of losing power. There are some theologians who are saying that all these conflicting things, plus the voice of women, modern biblical scholarship, which is challenging a lot of the stuff that's been held as sacred, honest historical scholarship, which is showing that a lot of the claims the church has made about itself don't stand up historically. A lot of the claims the Pope makes about the papacy don't stand up historically. If you go back to the Middle Ages, some of the claims for the power of the Pope are based on what are now known to be historical forgeries. The donation of Constantine, for any of your listeners who are historically oriented, is one example of that. It's all coming to a crunch, some theologians are saying, where there's got to be some radical slip, some radical shift, and we'll see a new church, in a sense, come to birth. Best case scenario. Worst case scenario is that people just continue to walk away in their droves, and the people who will be walking away are the educated, intelligent, thoughtful people who love justice.
Yes.
And they're the people we can't afford to lose.
Because I suppose it gets to a point where people say, look, basically I can't be bothered with this, and the church...
Or I can't do the work I need to do for justice in this organisation.
And because the church resists, but particularly on this point, it makes it harder for them to stay. When really what you're saying is they're the people that need to move the debate further. What do you think was behind, behind courage? I mean, how long has it been going? I mean, it's obviously been a thought that's run through the church for a while, but how did it get its start? Yeah,
courage was set up in the 70s, as I was saying. The church came up with this new thing, which has never been there before, that yes, there are people with homosexual orientation. It's not a sin, but it's a defect. And then maintain what they'd always said, which is homosexual activity or any same-sex activity, which they used to think was done by naughty heterosexuals, is wrong. So the first time in the 70s we've got this new approach in the church. At the same time, around that time, gay liberation, people speaking up, one of the cardinals in the US asked this John Hardy guy to set up some sort of ministry for gay people that would be quote-unquote faithful to church teaching, because lots of people were starting to advocate a new attitude towards homosexuality, where people could be encouraged to have relationships. So Harvey became the sort of front runner of this, and he's been doing it for 25, 30 years. It's very rigid. It starts from the idea that the church's teaching cannot be wrong.
Right.
No debate about it. So everything he says and does, all the research he produces, all his anecdotes, are all founded on the idea that church teaching can't be wrong, and we've got to prop it up and justify it. So they started setting up these little groups on the model of Alcoholics Anonymous to encourage homosexual people to be chaste. Then they got infiltrated, or they got interested in this idea that, well, maybe it's an illness and we can cure people of it, coming out of the Exodus type stuff, NARTH, the National Association for Reparative Therapy in the US, the whole ex-gay thing. Courage got involved in this, and now they're promoting this more, which I think is far more dangerous, of course. Again, it's all ideological. You know, we can get you out of being homosexual because really you're heterosexual because that's how God made everybody.
Yep.
Forget modern psychology, forget anthropology, forget cultural studies which show that homosexual people have always existed. It's totally ideological. I think one of the great dangers in Courage's role in the church is it's encouraging younger gay people who are perhaps interested in spirituality to go back into this model of trying and praying and taking therapy and trying to get out of it, which so many of us have been through already. I mean, anyone in 40s or 50s has been through this. It doesn't work, you know. It's just a recipe for distress and self-hatred. What I think we have to do as gay people, and something I'm quite passionate about, one of the problems a lot of these young people see is they look at the gay subculture and they don't see anything that has spiritual depth.
Yeah.
They don't see a lot of maturity in many cases. Often what's projected as the gay culture is very superficial, it's very consumerist, it's very materialist, it's very based on drugs and substance abuse, We have to be providing a different kind of alternative. We have to be reclaiming our own spiritual depth and wisdom, our own maturity, our own passion for justice, not just for ourselves but for other people. We have to be creating a credible alternative that young people can see this is a way of being gay and authentically spiritual, not this bogus stuff put forward by people like Courage.
Okay. Well, I think that's definitely one for another show. We've run out of time tonight. Thank you, Michael, for coming in. Really appreciate it. Thanks for watching Face to Face on Bent TV. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.